What happens when two people, both broken in different ways, meet inside a world that worships perfection? What if every argument hides a confession, and every silence holds a heartbeat that neither dares to name? In the gray rain of Seattle, Emma Caldwell walked into Hawthorne and Grant, one of the most demanding architecture firms in the country, carrying nothing but her talent, her scars, and a promise to never fall again. And then she met Lucas Grant, her brilliant, impossible boss. A man who built walls higher than any skyscraper he'd ever designed. They challenged each other. They pushed, teased, and fought their way through deadlines and desire, until one storm, one kiss, and one act of courage changed everything. But love in the workplace isn't a fairy tale. It's a test of integrity, of dignity, of who you become when everything you've built starts to crack. Will they survive the cost of honesty, or will the very thing that made them strong be what tears them apart? If you believe that some walls are meant to fall, like, share, and subscribe to Shining Stories and Let's Begin, the blueprint of forever. The rain came light and steady, the kind that Seattle was famous for, fine enough to blur the edges of the world without ever quite stopping it. Drops slid down bus windows like moving threads of silver. Streetcars hummed, tires hissed, and from the open doors of a nearby cafe drifted the deep, familiar smell of coffee and baked cinnamon. Emma Caldwell stepped down from the number 14 bus and paused on the curb. She lifted her face toward the tall glass buildings ahead. Every tower shimmered under a gray sky, reflections bending and breaking with each ripple of rain. Somewhere up there, behind one of those panes, waited the first day of the rest of her life. She clutched the strap of her satchel until her knuckles whitened. Inside were her sketches, a worn resume, and a small folded note her mother had once written, "Make every space kinder than you found it." Her mother's words had guided her through architecture school, through years of late nights and missed birthdays, through a marriage that had started with hope and ended in silence. Now, at 34, Emma was starting again, alone, cautious, but not defeated. Across the street, letters of brushed steel spelled out Hawthorne and Grant above a line of revolving doors. The firm's reputation stretched across the Pacific Northwest, brilliant, demanding, nearly impossible to impress. Emma exhaled a shaky breath, whispered, "You've got this," and crossed the street. Inside, the lobby gleamed polished concrete under her boots, warm cedar along the walls, soft light falling through a chandelier made of hand-blown glass. The space felt coldly perfect, like a gallery no one quite lived in. A receptionist looked up with a practiced smile. "Good morning. You must be Ms. Caldwell. The creative offices are on the 20th floor." "Thank you," Emma said, her voice steadier than she felt. The elevator doors closed her in with the faint scent of metal and perfume. She caught her reflection in the mirror, steel panels hair pulled into a neat bun, rain damp at the edges, blazer too new, eyes that carried both fear and quiet determination. For a moment, she wished her mother could see her now, not to praise, just to remind her that courage often looks exactly like showing up. The elevator chimed. When the doors opened, the world changed from gray to white light and sound keyboards clicking, printers humming, low conversation blending with the distant call of seagulls through half-open windows. Emma Caldwell. A woman with chestnut hair and warm brown eyes approached, a coffee mug in hand. "I'm Clara Hayes, operations manager. Welcome to the storm." Emma smiled nervously. "Is it always this quiet before it hits?" Clara laughed. "Pretty much. Follow me. I'll show you around before he realizes you're here." Clara tilted her head toward the far end of the open's floor. Beyond a stretch of desks and half walls stood a glass-walled office overlooking Elliott Bay. Inside, a tall man leaned over a drafting table, sleeves rolled past his elbows, pen moving fast and precise. "That's Lucas Grant, creative director. He's brilliant, impossible, and allergic to small talk. Don't take it personally." Emma tried to look uninterested, but curiosity betrayed her. The man behind the glass moved with quiet authority, as if gravity bent differently around him. Even from a distance, she could sense intensity, a kind that could either build you or break you. Clara led her to a modest workstation by the windows. "Here's your desk. Best view in the building if you lean left. Worst if you lean. Right depends on your mood." Emma set down her satchel, grateful for the small kindness. "It's perfect. Couple of tips," Clara said softly. "Mr. Grant notices everything. He'll test you. Everyone gets tested, but he's fair once you earn it. And don't let the silence scare you. It just means people are breathing between deadlines." Emma nodded, arranging her pencils and placing a small photo beside her monitor, a snapshot of her mother standing on the beach at Alki Point, wind tangling her hair. It grounded her more than any rule or plan ever could. Still, a question whispered through her mind. What if this place is too much? What if I'm not enough? Before she could answer herself, a chime crackled through the intercom. "Clara, send Ms. Caldwell to my office." Clara gave a sympathetic wince. That didn't take long. Emma smoothed her blazer, wiped her palms on her skirt, and crossed the floor. The echo of her heels marked time against the polished wood. The office door stood half open. Soft jazz played somewhere behind the hum of a computer. "Mr. Grant," she said, gently knocking. He looked up, and for a second she forgot her prepared introduction. Lucas Grant's face was sharper than in the magazine profiles she'd skimmed, lines of thought more than age, eyes the color of wet steel, focused and unreadable. "Ms. Caldwell," he said, voice calm but carrying weight. "You're early. I like to be on time." "Good habit," he replied. "Let's see if it survives this place." He gestured to the blueprints spread across his table. "Walk me through your design portfolio." For 10 measured minutes, he asked about everything: load distribution, materials, passive solar techniques. His tone cut clean, but never cruel. Emma answered carefully, steady under the pressure. When he challenged one of her solutions, she met his gaze. "It's unconventional, yes, but it reduces water runoff by half. It works." Something flickered in his expression: interest. Maybe surprise. "We'll test it." It wasn't approval, not yet, but it wasn't dismissal either. Emma gathered her things. "Welcome to Hawthorne and Grant," Lucas said, already turning back to his drawings. "Let's see if you can keep up." Back at her desk, Clara looked up over her monitor. "Still alive." "Apparently," Emma said, exhaling a breath she didn't know she'd been holding. Outside, the rain eased, and a slice of pale sunlight touched the bay. Emma stood for a moment, watching fairies glide through the water like patient ghosts. Something inside her loosened, not relief exactly, but possibility. Then she glanced toward the far office. Lucas stood behind the glass again, reviewing a model, the late light outlining his figure. Even from here she could feel it, the quiet pull of his focus, the gravity of someone used to shaping worlds and expecting others to follow. Emma straightened her shoulders, turned back to her screen, and whispered to herself, "Let's build something worth the storm." The next morning, the rain had stopped, but the streets of Seattle still glistened like polished stone. A faint fog rolled across the bay, swallowing the horizon, softening everything except Emma Caldwell's nerves. She arrived 20 minutes early again, coffee in hand, hoping to start quietly. The office was half empty. The hum of printers hadn't yet begun. For a few peaceful minutes she arranged samples on her desk, thin slats of maple, squares of slate, and a single sheet of tracing paper, already waiting for ideas. The piece lasted exactly 4 minutes. "Ms. Caldwell," a voice called from behind her. She turned. Lucas Grant stood there, jacket off, tie loosened just enough to look unintentional. His expression held the calm of someone who never had to raise his voice to be obeyed. "Good morning," she offered, bright but careful. He nodded once. "Follow me." No greeting, no small talk, just instruction. She followed him into his glass-walled office where the smell of graphite and strong black coffee hung in the air. Rolls of blueprints were stacked in disciplined towers. A sketch of a waterfront museum covered one wall like a map of his mind. "Have a seat," he said, though he remained standing. Emma placed her coffee aside and waited. Lucas tapped a pencil against the table. "Yesterday you mentioned a runoff channel idea. Show me the math, the projections cost, slope, flow, maintenance. Don't tell me it feels efficient. Prove it." Emma reached into her folder and pulled out a thin binder. "I ran the calculations last night. It saves roughly 8% in drainage cost annually. The angle aligns with the natural incline of the lot." He flipped through the pages, eyes moving fast. 8% is minor. "It's sustainable," she said evenly. "Over 10 years, that's a considerable difference." He didn't look up. "You're thinking like a project manager, not a designer, and you're thinking like someone who's never had to justify a budget," she replied before she could stop herself. The pencil stopped tapping. Silence. The air in the room seemed to tighten. Then, to her surprise, the corner of his mouth lifted slightly, not a smile, exactly, but the ghost of one. "You've got a spine. I like that. I have principles," she said, keeping her tone level. "Spines just come with them." Lucas closed the binder, noted, "Next time, bring a digital model. I want to see how it integrates with the Please concept. I can do that by Friday, Thursday," he corrected. "End of day." Her jaw clenched for a second, but she nodded. "Thursday it is." He turned back toward the window, conversation apparently over. "That will be all, Ms. Caldwell." Emma rose slowly, reminding herself to breathe. As she stepped outside the office, her reflection caught in the glass wall a woman holding her ground, though her hands trembled just enough to betray the cost of it. At her desk, Clara Hayes was waiting with 2 steaming mugs. She passed one to Emma like a peace offering. "I heard thunder," Clara whispered. "Should I start boarding up the windows?" Emma laughed under her breath. "He's something is one word for it." Clara leaned closer. "No one argues with Lucas Grant and survives." "What did you do?" "Apparently, I lived dangerously and brought numbers." Clara grinned. "Well, good luck. He respects people who can challenge him. At least, that's the rumor. Most of us just duck." Emma took a sip of coffee, feeling warmth spread through her chilled fingers. Around them. The office filled quickly, voices, keyboards, footsteps. A few curious glances drifted toward her. Word traveled fast here. For the next several hours, she buried herself in work, drafting elevations, checking measurements, refining details. Each time she glanced toward Lucas's office, she found him deep in concentration, occasionally marking something on a plan with quick, precise strokes. He never once looked her way, yet she felt observed all the same. By noon, her head ached from focus. Clara coaxed her to the break room for lunch, a space lined with sketches and leftover models. "Don't let him scare you," Clara said between bites of salad. "He's just intense. I noticed you'll adjust, or you'll burn out. There's really no in between." Emma smiled faintly. "Maybe I'll be the exception." "That's what we all said." Clara winked. "Welcome to the experiment." When Emma returned to her desk, she found a note clipped to her monitor. "Conference room 3 at 2 p.m. Bring the Caldwell runoff proposal." The handwriting was unmistakably his, neat, slanted, and annoyingly confident. At 2 sharp, she entered the conference room. A small team of designers waited, murmuring among themselves. Lucas stood at the head of the table, sleeves rolled up, the day's plans projected on the wall. "We'll review revisions to the waterfront project," he said. "Ms. Caldwell will present her idea." Eyes turned toward her. Emma inhaled slowly and began, voice steady, slides advancing with each word. She spoke about slope ratios, sustainability credits, the long-term environmental benefit. Halfway through, Lucas interrupted. "That angle contradicts the current pedestrian flow." "It does," Emma agreed. "But that's the point. The slight deviation guides traffic toward the central plaza instead of the service alley. It creates a natural gathering space." Someone at the table nodded. Another scribbled a note. Lucas stared at the projection, then back at her. Risky. It could bottleneck foot traffic. It could, she said, or it could make people stop and look up for once. Isn't that what design is supposed to do? A pause? Then a few quiet chuckles from the others. Even Lucas's expression softened barely. Continue, he said. By the end of the meeting, her voice was hoarse, but her pulse steadied. Lucas dismissed the team with a brief nod. As she gathered her papers, he said quietly, "You defend your work well. Don't mistake that for approval." "I wouldn't dare," she replied. Outside the room, Clara was waiting again, wide-eyed. "You're fearless." You know that Emma exhaled a laugh. "No, just too stubborn to fold." "Same thing," Clara said, patting her arm. "He likes you?" "He doesn't," Emma murmured. "He just hasn't decided how to get rid of me yet." But as she sat back at her desk, watching Lucas through the glass wall, she caught a glimpse of him watching her in return, an unreadable flicker, gone almost before she noticed. In the quiet after everyone left that evening, she closed her laptop and stared out at the darkening bay. The ferries were dots of light on black water, moving steadily through the mist. She thought about the day, the questions, the arguments, the strange charge that hummed between them. "He's infuriating," she whispered to herself, smiling despite the exhaustion, "but brilliant." And though she wouldn't admit it out loud, part of her already wanted to know what he'd challenge next. By the third week, Emma Caldwell began to measure time, not in hours, but in deadlines. Days blurred together under the fluorescent hum of Hawthorne and Grant's open office. Mornings arrived before she had fully left the night behind. Evenings vanished in the glow of her computer screen. Outside, Seattle's endless rain whispered against the glass like a metronome for exhaustion. Lucas Grant's standards were not high, they were astronomical. Every sketch, every draft, every proposal passed through him like a gauntlet. A misplaced line, a miscalculated ratio, even the wrong font could draw his quiet, surgical disapproval. Precision, he often said, without looking up. If it's not exact, it's wrong. At first, Emma tried to match his rhythm. She stayed late, skipped lunches, rewrote entire design sheets from scratch. The work itself thrilled her, the kind of creative challenge she had always wanted, but the pace was brutal. Each night, she promised herself she'd leave by 7. Each night, the clock crossed 10 before she packed her bag. There were moments when she caught her reflection in the office glass tired eyes, ink on her fingers, hair coming loose from its neat bun, and she wondered who this relentless version of herself had become. Still, she kept going. Pride wouldn't let her stop. When Lucas handed her the renovation plans for the downtown civic center, she took it as both a test and a compliment. The project was massive 30 pages of structure, zoning, environmental compliance. He wanted preliminary designs by Monday morning. It was Friday afternoon. "Is that even possible?" Clara whispered when he left. Emma gave a dry laugh. "Apparently, it will have to be." She spent the weekend at the office, living on takeout noodles and black coffee. Outside, the city lights reflected in the wet pavement like 1,000 blurred stars. Inside, her world narrowed to lines, angles, and the faint sound of the janitor's radio drifting from the hallway. By Sunday night, her shoulders ached, but the plans were ready. She printed them carefully, labeling each section. For the first time in weeks, she felt almost proud. Monday morning, Lucas arrived at 8 sharp. He glanced at the rolled blueprints on her desk. "Ready?" "Yes, sir," she said, offering them. He took them without expression, disappearing into his office. Hours passed. She tried to focus on her next assignment, but the silence from behind his glass door felt heavier with every minute. At 11:30, the intercom buzzed. "Ms. Caldwell, my office." Emma's pulse jumped. She grabbed her notebook and walked over. Lucas stood by the drafting table, her blueprints unrolled across it, red marks slashed through several sections. He didn't look up when he spoke. Section D, your load-bearing calculations are off by 2%. They're within the safety margin, she replied quietly. I don't accept margins, he said. And the roof angle, why alter it from the original to redirect light into the atrium? It reduces artificial lighting needs. It also increases glare, he countered. Not if you adjust the panel tint. That made him pause. His pen stopped moving. You adjusted the tint. Yes, it's noted on page 9. He turned to the page, scanning. There it was, highlighted in neat handwriting. For a second, something flickered in his expression. Surprise, perhaps. But then his tone hardened again. Your notes should be typed. Handwriting can be misread. Emma exhaled through her nose, steadying herself. Of course. I'll correct that. He set the pen down. You worked all weekend on this. Yes. Next time, use your time more efficiently. No one asked you to overcommit. I wasn't overcommitting. I was delivering. The words slipped out before she could temper them. Lucas looked up sharply, eyes narrowing. Are you challenging me, Ms. Caldwell? Emma met his gaze. No, Mr. Grant, I'm clarifying. You said precision matters. I was precise. A long silence followed, the kind that seems to stretch the air itself. Then, unexpectedly, he gave a small, almost imperceptible nod. Noted? He gathered the blueprints, rolling them carefully. I'll review the rest later. You can go? She turned to leave, but before she reached the door, his voice softened just slightly. Good work on the natural light optimization? Emma froze, glancing over her shoulder. He didn't look at her. He was already back at the table, studying the next page, but the words hung in the air like something fragile and rare. Back at her desk, Clara peeked over the partition. How bad? Emma sat down slowly, still catching her breath. It was surgical. Clara smiled sympathetically. That's his version of caring. I think he might have said something nice. Did he make eye contact? No. Then it's a miracle, Clara said, grinning. That night, when the office emptied and the rain began again, Emma stayed behind. The building lights shimmered against the bay, 1,000 reflections trembling in the dark water. She sat quietly at her desk, rubbing the ache from her wrists. A soft knock startled her. Lucas stood at the doorway, coat over his arm. You're still here? He said. So are you, she replied. He looked around the quiet room. Most people don't last this long under pressure. I'm not most people. He studied her for a moment, unreadable as always. Then he simply said, See that you're not, and left. Emma watched him disappear down the hall. For the first time, she realized he wasn't only demanding, he was haunted. There was something in the way he carried his silence, like a man trying to outrun his own perfection. She turned off her lamp and looked out over the water. The rain had eased to a whisper. She thought of her mother again. Make every space kinder than you found it. Maybe that's what she was doing here, in her own quiet way, making space, not just in the firm, but in herself. And though Lucas Grant would never admit it, she could feel the faintest shift between them, like the moment before a storm breaks, when the air hums with both tension and possibility. The office was quiet that night, quieter than usual, the kind of quiet that hummed in the walls and made the fluorescent lights sound louder than they should. It was almost midnight. Everyone had gone home hours ago, everyone except Emma Caldwell. She sat alone in the model room, a space filled with wood, glue, and the faint smell of paint thinner. A tiny replica of the new Civic Center sat under a lamp in front of her, still missing the eastern facade. She leaned close, holding her breath as she attached one last fragile beam. Her eyes burned from the strain, but she refused to leave it unfinished. Lucas had asked for the presentation model by morning. He hadn't said she had to stay late, but she wanted to prove that she could. Just as she placed the final piece, the light above her flickered, once, twice, then darkness. The low hum of the HVAC stuttered and died. The building fell into silence so complete it almost felt alive. Great, she muttered, searching for her phone flashlight. Just perfect. The emergency lights kicked on a few seconds later, dim red strips along the floor, bathing the room in an eerie glow. Outside the window, the skyline was a scatter of lights and fog, the Space Needle barely visible through the rain. She sighed, sitting back. So much for finishing strong. A door opened somewhere down the hall. Footsteps echoed. She froze. Then a voice steady, unmistakable. Ms. Caldwell. She exhaled, relief mixing with mild irritation. Mr. Grant, you scared me half to death. Lucas appeared in the doorway, his figure outlined by the faint red light. He carried a small flashlight, its beam slicing through the darkness. His tie was gone, his sleeves rolled, his hair slightly disheveled. Power's out on the upper floors, he said. Generator kicked in downstairs, but the breaker here's faulty. He walked in, scanning the model table. You're still here? Couldn't leave it unfinished, she said. Deadline? Remember, I didn't mean tonight's deadline to be literal. You should have specified. For the first time since she'd known him, he laughed a low, genuine sound that seemed to startle even him. Emma smiled despite herself. There it is. Proof you're human. Don't tell anyone, he replied. It would ruin my reputation. They moved together around the model, using the flashlights to check the alignment. Shadows danced across the miniature buildings, turning them into something strangely alive. Lucas crouched beside her to examine the facade. Your scale work is clean, he said quietly. Most people rush this part. I like details, she answered. They're the difference between something that works and something that matters. He nodded slowly. My father used to say that. She looked at him. He was an architect too. Lucas hesitated. Engineer, bridges, mostly. He designed one outside Portland, the Keller Crossing. It collapsed when I was 16. Emma's breath caught. I'm so sorry. He shrugged lightly, but his eyes stayed fixed on the model. Everyone blamed the weather. He blamed himself. He never built again after that. The room seemed smaller suddenly, filled with the weight of something unsaid. That must have been hard, she said softly. He didn't answer right away. He taught me to chase perfection so no one would ever question my work. I think I took that too literally. Emma set her flashlight down, letting the red emergency glow fill the space between them. Perfection isn't safety, Lucas. It's just another kind of cage. He turned toward her, surprised to hear his first name spoken aloud. The sound of it from her lips landed somewhere deep, somewhere he hadn't visited in years. Maybe, he said quietly, but it's the only way I know to keep things standing. She smiled gently. Sometimes things stand because they're flexible, not flawless. For a moment, neither spoke. The rain outside grew heavier, drumming against the tall glass windows. The emergency lights flickered again, making their shadows stretch across the floor. Emma reached for the model, testing a joint. You know, if the generator's out, we might lose all the digital files soon. Lucas raised an eyebrow. Then we'd better fix the breaker. You know how to do that. Enough to be dangerous. They found the breaker room at the end of the corridor. The space smelled faintly of dust and oil. Lucas knelt beside the panel, flashlight wedged under his arm. Hold this wire steady, he instructed. Emma crouched beside him, fingers brushing his as she took the wire. A jolt, small, electric, not from the wire, but from the contact, ran through her. She pretended not to notice, though her pulse did. Got it, he said. Now. On 3. 1, 2. The light snapped back before he said 3. Both of them blinked against the sudden brightness. Guess it only needed attention, she said, smiling. He looked up at her, still kneeling, still close enough that she could see the small scar at the edge of his jaw. Most things do. They both stood, awkward laughter breaking whatever silence had lingered. Back in the model room, the space seemed transformed. Under the bright lights, everything looked clean again, normal, ordinary, but nothing felt the same. Lucas studied the finished model. You did well, he said simply. Emma shrugged. It's a start. He nodded. Sometimes that's harder than finishing. She gathered her things, slipping her coat on. I should get home before the next storm hits. Do you walk bus? A long one? He hesitated, then said, Be careful. This city eats umbrellas for breakfast. She laughed. I'll keep that in mind. At the doorway. She paused. Thank you for helping with the lights. Thank you, he said quietly, for staying when you didn't have to. For a brief second, their eyes met two people who both knew something had shifted, though neither could name it. Then Emma turned and walked down the hallway, her footsteps soft against the polished floor. Lucas stayed where he was, watching her reflection fade from the glass. The model glowed under the restored lights, perfect and silent. Yet the air still held the warmth of her laughter. He ran a hand through his hair, exhaling. The office had always felt like a machine, efficient, predictable, unfeeling. But tonight, it had felt almost alive. As he shut off the lamp, he found himself thinking not about the model, or the deadlines, or the firm's reputation, but about a woman who had stayed through the dark, quietly teaching him that even perfection could use a little light. Monday began with sunlight, real sunlight, rare in Seattle, and the strange feeling that the world had softened overnight. The weekend's rain had scrubbed the city clean. Even the air through the open office windows smelled new, like damp cedar and coffee grounds. Emma Caldwell arrived early again, her travel mug steaming in the cool morning. She was halfway through reviewing material costs when Clara Hayes appeared beside her, carrying 2 muffins and a grin that could only mean mischief. So, Clara said, setting a muffin on Emma's keyboard, are we pretending Friday night didn't happen? Or should I ask why the emergency lights flickered back on at exactly 12:07 Emma blinked. Excuse me. The security feed caught 2 silhouettes in the model room. Clara lowered her voice dramatically. Care to guess who Emma groaned, rubbing her forehead. We fixed a breaker, that's all. Clara tore off a piece of muffin. That's how every office rumor starts, with electricity. Clara, Emma warned, though a smile tugged at her mouth. Don't you have budgets to terrify people with? Already did. You're my entertainment break. She winked. Careful, dear. People here have a name for what happens when Lucas Grant starts noticing someone. Emma folded her arms. Oh, and what's that? The Lucas effect? Emma laughed outright. That sounds like a diagnosis. It is. Symptoms include excessive perfectionism, heart palpitations during critiques, and sudden competence under pressure. I'll survive. Clara smirked. You say that now. Wait until he stares at one of your blueprints for 30 seconds and you forget your own name. Emma shook her head, but warmth bloomed under her collar. She returned to her drafting screen, yet the conversation followed her all day like background music. By late morning, Lucas's voice carried across the open floor. Caldwell, conference room in 5. She grabbed her notebook, whispering to Clara, "See still alive?" "Barely," Clara whispered back. Inside the glass room, sunlight slanted across a table crowded with sketches of the Civic Center facade. Lucas stood at one end, marker in hand, a smear of graphite across his wrist. We're revising the roofline again, he said, too heavy visually. Thoughts Emma studied the sketch. Reduce the trim depth by 1/2 inch. The shadows will sharpen without losing structure. He looked at her. 1/2 inch, 3/8 if you're nervous, she countered. A faint smile ghosted his face. Confident today? Must be the weather. Their small exchanges had begun to carry something like rhythm, half debate, half dance. When another designer suggested a more decorative facade, Lucas dismissed it instantly. Emma raised a brow. Maybe consider contrast instead of ornament. Subtle can still be beautiful. He tapped his pen. Conceding. Show me. So, she did tracing over his lines, her hand steady, their shoulders nearly touching. The scent of coffee on his breath mixed with the clean tang of graphite. He watched her redraw the curve, and something shifted behind his eyes, a softness quickly hidden. When the meeting ended, he said quietly, "Good instinct." She replied just as evenly, "Don't sound so shocked." He chuckled under his breath. Point taken. Hours later, the office slipped into its afternoon lull. The air hummed with printers, distant footsteps, and the hiss of the espresso machine in the kitchenette. Emma went for a refill. Lucas was already there, sleeves rolled up, pouring sugar into his coffee with the focus of a surgeon. "Do you ever sleep?" she asked. He glanced up. "Occasionally, it's inefficient," she smiled. "That explains a lot. You're one to talk. I got an email from you at 2 Saturday. That was Friday night," she corrected. "The line between the two is flexible." He handed her the sugar packet. "You're adapting faster than I expected." "Is that a compliment?" observation. "Could have fooled me." A brief pause. Then, for the first time, his tone softened. It was a compliment. Emma looked at him, caught off guard. The corners of his mouth twitched like he wasn't used to saying such things aloud. "Well," she said, stirring her coffee, "I appreciate the anomaly." He laughed quietly, a sound that felt entirely too rare in that place. Lucas's thoughts, later that day, refused to stay buried. He had spent years building walls, rules, ethics, discipline, everything to keep the world at arm's length. But Emma Caldwell had a way of slipping through the cracks, not by force, but by presence. She didn't seek approval, she earned it, and that unnerved him. Watching her work was like watching order emerge from chaos steady, deliberate, kind. He admired that, maybe too much, and admiration, in his experience, was a dangerous thing. He told himself it was professional respect. He even believed it for a few minutes each day. But then she would laugh softly at some remark, and the sound would undo every boundary he had set. He had once promised himself never again to blur the line between admiration and affection. And yet, here he was, redrawing the line daily, thinner each time. Friday afternoon brought another deadline, another stack of revisions. Lucas dropped the folder on her desk. "Need these by end of day?" She opened it. At 4:30. "Do you enjoy watching people panic? Only when it's productive?" Emma shot him a mock glare. "Remind me to schedule your empathy training." He smiled. "I took that course once. Failed spectacularly." The banter drew a few amused glances from nearby desks. Clara passed by, whispering, "The Lucas effect is progressing nicely." Emma nearly choked on her coffee. By 4:25 p.m., she marched into his office with the completed file. 4:30, she said, setting it down, on time, as promised. He flipped through the pages. Impressive turnaround. She crossed her arms. "I work well under unreasonable expectations. That explains your success here." She tilted her head. "And your reputation." Their eyes met steady, unreadable, something unspoken passing between challenge and recognition. "Finally," Lucas said. "Take the weekend off?" Caldwell, planning to yes, he said. "Think of it as an order, not a suggestion." She smiled. "Then I'll think about disobeying it." He laughed quiet, genuine. As she turned to leave, he found himself watching the space she'd just occupied, wondering why the room felt a little dimmer once she was gone. That evening, as the city lights flickered to life, Emma lingered by the window overlooking the bay. The day had been long, filled with deadlines and teasing words that somehow left her lighter than before. She thought about Lucas's rare laughter, the way he'd looked at her for half a second longer than necessary. She wasn't naive, she knew the risks, the gossip, the rules that guarded professional distance. Still, a small smile tugged at her lips. She enjoyed the game, the mental chess, the challenge, but she also knew herself well enough to draw a line, firm and quiet. Respect first, friendship maybe. Anything beyond that would only complicate what she'd worked so hard to build. She closed her laptop, whispering to her reflection in the darkened glass. Boundaries, Emma, remember boundaries. And yet, as she left the office, She couldn't help but think of his laugh echoing behind her, soft and unexpected, like the start of something she wasn't ready to name. The city was half asleep when Emma Caldwell looked up from her monitor and realized the office had emptied hours ago. Only the soft hum of the HVAC and the whisper of rain against the glass kept her company. Her eyes burned from staring at plans too long, but the deadline was close, and Lucas had asked for perfection again. The final presentation for the Civic Center would be at 9 the next morning. Investors, city planners, the press, everyone important. And Lucas Grant didn't tolerate almost ready. Emma leaned closer to the drafting table, adjusting a rendering of the east facade. The shadows didn't fall quite right. She adjusted the angle, then sighed. It was past 11. Her coffee had gone cold. She was so focused that she didn't notice the footsteps until the lights flickered brighter. Still here? His voice. Lucas stood by the door, coat over one arm. Shirt sleeves rolled past his elbows, the collar of his white shirt slightly undone. He looked tired, though even exhaustion couldn't dull his presence. Emma straightened. "I could ask you the same thing." "I forgot my laptop," he said. Then, after a beat, "You should have gone home hours ago." "I will." When the line stopped fighting me, he walked closer, studying her work. The lamplight cut soft gold across his face. "You're adjusting the east facade?" The light distribution felt off. The glass angles weren't matching the mood you described. He leaned in, just beside her. "And what mood was that openness?" she said quietly. "You said you wanted it to feel like the city could breathe again." He watched the design projected across the screen, the subtle shift of light tracing through the digital model. For a long moment, he said nothing. Then, softly, "You listen more closely than most people." Emma turned slightly. Their shoulders brushed. The contact sent a small, unexpected warmth through her chest, one that both comforted and unsettled her. She cleared her throat. Listening helps avoid rework. His mouth curved faintly, always so practical. Someone has to be. Silence stretched comfortable at first, then heavy. The lamp hummed quietly between them, casting overlapping shadows that made it hard to tell where his ended and hers began. Lucas pointed toward the rendering. "Move the center skylight 3 feet west. The light at noon will cut across the main stairwell. It'll draw the eye upward." Emma adjusted the line. "Like this." He leaned in closer to see, his breath brushing her shoulder. Exactly like that. Neither moved. For a moment, all she could hear was the slow rhythm of their breathing, the sound of rain beyond the glass, the low hum of the city below. Something fragile hung in the air, like the pause before a confession. Then Lucas spoke, voice softer than she'd ever heard it. "You know, Emma?" He stopped. She looked at him, waiting. "What?" He hesitated, searching for words that refused to come. You've changed the way this office feels." Her heart skipped, meaning he exhaled, half a laugh, half a sigh. "Forget it. It's late. I'm not making sense." "No," she said quietly. "You are." He turned toward her. Their eyes met gray against blue, sharp against soft. The distance between them felt impossibly thin. She could smell the faint trace of cedar in his cologne, the warmth of coffee still lingering on his breath. 1,000 unspoken things hovered there. Admiration, respect, longing neither of them could name. Emma's pulse quickened, but her mind whispered a warning. "Don't." She looked away, breaking the spell. "You should get some rest. Tomorrow's a big day." He nodded, slowly. "Right." He took a step back, the space between them suddenly colder. "You're good at this," he said, his tone quieter, gentler. "Better than most I've worked with." She smiled faintly. "Careful." That almost sounded like a compliment. "Almost," he said, the corner of his mouth lifting. For a moment, it felt like they might laugh, might break the tension, but neither did. The silence was too heavy now, too full of everything they couldn't say. Lucas closed his laptop, slipping it under his arm. You should go home soon. I need you sharp in the morning. I will, she said, after one last check. He paused at the door, glancing back. The lamplight caught her hair, the curve of her shoulders as she leaned over her work, focused, steady, unaware that she'd already changed something fundamental in him. Good night. Emma, he said, and this time her name carried a softness that startled them both. She looked up, meeting his eyes. Good night, Lucas. He stood there a heartbeat too long, as if memorizing the sound of his name in her voice. Then he turned and left. The door clicked shut. The room felt bigger without him, but also emptier. Emma stared at the screen, though her mind was far from the facade design. Her pulse was still uneven, her chest tight with something she couldn't quite name, something between admiration and fear. This can't happen, she thought. Not here, not now. But when she closed her eyes, she could still feel the echo of his nearness, the warmth of a man who rarely let anyone close, who almost said something that could have changed everything. Outside, thunder rolled faintly over Puget Sound, a low promise of another storm. Emma saved her work, shut down the lamp, and stood in the dark. The rain had started again, soft and steady against the glass. She slipped on her coat and walked toward the elevator, her reflection flickering across the polished floors. The silence between them might have been professional, but it wasn't empty. It was charged, alive. And as she stepped into the elevator, Emma knew neither of them would sleep much that night. By midweek, the rhythm at Hawthorne and Grant had shifted. The storm that had gathered in the quiet corners of the office, the one neither Emma nor Lucas dared to name, hung in the air like a low frequency only they could hear. Then, without warning, a new sound entered the mix, bright, easy, and completely disarming. Morning, everyone. The voice belonged to Ethan Miles, the firm's new structural consultant, 36, tall, warm smile, and the kind of relaxed confidence that instantly drew people in. He had been transferred from the Chicago branch, bringing with him a reputation for innovation and a sense of humor that felt out of place amid the office's usual restraint. Emma looked up from her drafting table as he approached, coffee in one hand, blueprints in the other. You must be Emma Caldwell, he said, extending a hand. The architect who's been giving our fearless director a run for his money. She laughed lightly, shaking his hand. I wouldn't say that. I just try to survive the week. Well, rumor has it you're doing more than surviving. I saw your Civic Center renderings. They're stunning. Thank you, she said, feeling a small rush of pride. I had a good team or not. The vision's yours, Ethan said. Mind if I pick your brain about the support beams? I think we can reduce the load stress with a lateral brace. Of course, Emma replied, gesturing toward her table. Let's take a look. An hour later, they were surrounded by sketches and half-empty coffee cups. Ethan's laughter came easily. His energy was warm, unguarded. For the first time in weeks, Emma felt herself relax, no measured silences, no invisible lines to navigate, just honest collaboration. That's brilliant, she said, looking at one of his notes. Why didn't we think of that before? Because you were too busy doing all the heavy lifting, Ethan teased. I'm just here to make you look even smarter. Emma smiled, shaking her head. Flattery will get you exactly nowhere. That's fine. I like the view from nowhere. She laughed, really laughed, just as Lucas Grant walked into the room. The sound hit him before the sight did. Then he saw them, Ethan leaning casually against her desk, sleeves rolled up, Emma smiling, her eyes bright with ease. Lucas's steps slowed. Something sharp twisted in his chest before he smoothed it away with practiced control. Ms. Caldwell, he said, his tone calm but clipped. When you have a moment. I'd like to review the north elevation. Ethan turned, still smiling. Director Grant, I was just telling Emma how impressive her facade work is. I'm aware of her capabilities, Lucas replied coolly, which is why she has deadlines to meet. Emma glanced at him, his posture rigid, jaw tight. Of course, she said softly. I'll bring the files to your office shortly." When Lucas left, Ethan raised a brow. "Did I step on a landmine?" Emma exhaled, forcing a smile. "No, that's just his way." The famous Lucas Grant intensity," Ethan said with a mock shudder. "Well, if he ever glares too hard, just stand behind me. I'll absorb the impact." She laughed again, though the humor didn't quite erase the tension now crawling up her spine. Later that afternoon, Clara Hayes stopped by Emma's desk, leaning against the divider with a look that meant she'd been observing. "So," Clara said casually, "our new consultant seems chatty." "He's nice," Emma said. "Smart, easy to work with." "Mm-hmm." "And Lucas?" Emma blinked. "What about him?" "Oh, I don't know," Clara said, twirling her pen. "He's been pacing his office like a caged animal since lunch. I'm just saying, maybe be careful with the smiles." Emma frowned. "You think he's jealous, I think," Clara said carefully. "That men like Lucas Grant don't do jealousy. They do control. And when something disrupts that balance," she snapped her fingers lightly. "Sparks fly." Emma rolled her eyes, but couldn't shake the truth of it. "Clara, I'm not whatever you're thinking. It's not like that." "Sure," Clara said, smiling knowingly. "Just remember, even friendly fire burns." By early evening, the office had thinned again. Ethan lingered by Emma's table, running through final calculations. "I'll send over the revisions tonight," he said. "Maybe over a drink sometime, we can debate load-bearing philosophies." Emma smiled politely. "Careful, I take my load-bearing very seriously." "Good," he said with a grin. "So do I." She shook her head, amused, and began packing her things. That's when Lucas appeared again. "Ms. Caldwell," he said evenly. "Are we ready for tomorrow's client review?" Almost Ethan's helping with the structural analysis. Lucas's gaze flicked to Ethan, then back to Emma. "I wasn't aware we needed outside assistance on this stage." Ethan, oblivious or brave or both, extended a hand, just offering a second set of eyes. "You've built a remarkable team here." Lucas hesitated before shaking his hand. "We value precision here, Mr. Miles, not popularity." The air in the room thinned. Ethan's smile faltered slightly. Emma opened her mouth, but Lucas continued. "Ms. Caldwell, my office. Now, please." The moment the door shut behind them, Lucas dropped the professional mask. His voice was quiet, but sharp. "You seem distracted. Excuse me." "With Miles. Laughing. Chatting. This isn't a coffee house." "You're better than that." Her jaw tightened. "I was collaborating, not socializing. From where I stood, the line was blurry." "Then maybe you were standing too close," she said, surprising even herself with the edge in her voice. He froze, eyes narrowing. For a second, neither breathed. Then, softly, almost as if it hurt to admit, "You're right. I was." She blinked. The tension softened just slightly, but the silence between them grew heavier, thicker. "I expect the final draft by morning," he said, his tone returning to steel. "Good night, Ms. Caldwell." When she left his office, her pulse was still racing. Part anger, part something far more dangerous. That night, Lucas stood alone in the darkened hallway, watching through the glass as Emma and Ethan gathered their things. Ethan said something that made her laugh again, a real, unguarded laugh that reached her eyes. Lucas clenched his jaw, the reflection of her smile burning against the glass like a truth he didn't want to see. He told himself it didn't matter, that she was free to be friendly, that this was professional, rational, but as he turned off the office lights, a small, unwelcome word whispered through his mind. "Jealous?" He exhaled, hard, as though the sound itself might chase it away. But it stayed, and for the first time in years, Lucas Grant, who prided himself on control, felt something completely out of it. The next morning began quietly, too quietly. The city's usual hum seemed muffled, and inside Hawthorne and Grant, even the printers sounded hesitant. Emma Caldwell arrived early, her heart still heavy from the night before. She told herself she was fine, that Lucas's behavior had been nothing more than professional frustration, that the look in his eyes as she'd walked out tight, conflicted, almost wounded wasn't her problem, but pretending was easier than feeling. She focused on the model revisions, letting the rhythm of her work drown out thought. When Clara stopped by with her usual morning coffee, Emma managed a thin smile. "You okay?" Clara asked gently. "Of course." Emma lied. "Just tired." Clara studied her for a moment, then nodded. "If you say so, just don't let someone else's storm wash you away." "All right," Emma forced another smile. "Promise." But peace didn't last long. At 9:43 a.m., the intercom on her desk crackled to life. "Ms. Caldwell," came Lucas's voice, low and clipped. "My office, now." The air inside his office felt different that morning, colder, heavier. Lucas stood by the window, hands in his pockets, staring out at the skyline. Rain streaked the glass in long, deliberate lines. He didn't turn when she entered. "You wanted to see me?" she asked carefully. "Yes," he said. "Close the door." She hesitated, then did as told. For a moment, neither spoke. Then Lucas said, "I've received feedback from senior management about your interactions with Mr. Miles." Emma blinked. "Feedback concerns," he clarified, "about professionalism, boundaries." "Boundaries," she repeated, her tone sharpening. "We were discussing a structural adjustment. Lucas, Mr. Grant." He corrected automatically, still facing the window. She folded her arms. "Right. Mr. Grant. If this is about collaboration, that's part of my job." He finally turned, his expression unreadable. "It's not just collaboration when it becomes a distraction." Her eyes widened. "A distraction." He stepped closer, voice steady but cold. "Your work has been less focused this week. Missed revisions, late submissions. I can't afford distractions in this department." Emma's heart pounded not from guilt, but from disbelief. "You think Ethan's the reason for that? Not the 12-hour days or the 10 new projects you dropped on me." "This isn't personal," he said. "It sure sounds personal. Then perhaps you should reflect on why that is." The words hit like a slap. She took a slow breath. "Let me make something clear. I have never been anything but professional. If people choose to gossip because I happen to smile during a conversation, that's their problem, not mine." Lucas's jaw tightened. "Perception matters. Ms. Caldwell, this firm's reputation matters. So does self-respect," she shot back. "And I won't apologize for having basic human decency." "You think this is about decency, I think," she said, stepping closer, "that this is about you. About whatever you can't admit to yourself." He stared at her, silent. "Every time you look at me, you build walls just so you don't have to see what's really there," she said. "And then you accuse me of being unprofessional because it's easier than facing your own jealousy." His face hardened. "Careful. Emma." "No," she said quietly. "You don't get to silence me this time." He took a step forward, close enough that she could see the faint shadows under his eyes. "You're out of line, and you're out of excuses," she said. "You're jealous, Lucas, and that's not my fault." Silence. Thunder rolled distantly over the bay, low and threatening. For a heartbeat, she thought he might deny it, but he didn't. His eyes flickered just once with something raw and unguarded. Then it was gone. "Believe what you want," he said tightly. "But this conversation stays between us. I expect you to maintain a professional distance from Miles. Understood?" Emma stared at him, stunned. "You're unbelievable. If you have a problem with my leadership, I don't have a problem with your leadership," she interrupted, her voice trembling now. "I have a problem with hypocrisy. You demand perfection, but the moment someone challenges you, you hide behind authority. You don't want an assistant. Lucas, you want obedience." He flinched, barely perceptible. Her voice softened, but only slightly. "I've worked too hard to let anyone, especially you, make me feel small again." She turned, gripping the door handle. "Emma," he said quietly, She froze. "Don't walk out like this." She looked back at him, eyes bright with anger and something heartbreakingly close to pain. "You made sure there's nowhere else to go." And with that, she walked out, the door closing behind her like the sound of something breaking. For a long time, Lucas didn't move. The office felt hollow, stripped of air. He pressed his palms to the cool glass of the window and stared at the rain. "You're jealous," she'd said. The words echoed in his head, relentless. He wanted to dismiss them, to bury them under logic and duty, but he couldn't. She wasn't wrong, not entirely. He hated how easily Ethan's name had tightened his chest. He hated the way her laughter with someone else had felt like loss. He hated most of all that she could make him feel anything at all. "Get control," he told himself. "You can't afford this." But control was already slipping. In the design room, Emma sat alone at her desk, staring blankly at her screen. Her hands trembled as she tried to type. The anger had already begun to fade, replaced by a slow, heavy ache. She replayed every word, every look, trying to understand how they'd gone from respect to accusation. She'd wanted to challenge him, not hurt him, but the way he'd looked at her, half fury, half something else, had shaken her more than she wanted to admit. "Boundaries," she whispered bitterly to herself. Right. The word felt meaningless now. Clara appeared silently beside her, setting a cup of tea on the desk. "I don't know what happened," she said softly, "but you look like someone just stole your compass." Emma didn't answer. She couldn't. She just sat there, staring at the window, where the rain traced thin lines down the glass, like the world itself was weeping quietly with her. That night, both of them stayed late, working in separate offices, neither ready to leave. The storm outside grew louder, wind pushing against the windows. Lucas sat at his desk, staring at the faint reflection of himself in the glass. "You're a fool," he muttered. Down the hall, Emma whispered the same words. "You're a fool, Emma, for caring." Two hearts, in two silent rooms, beating to the same rhythm of regret, each too proud, too wounded, to cross the space between them, and outside, the city kept raining, washing nothing clean. The storm rolled in at dusk, slow and deliberate, like a promise the sky intended to keep. By nightfall, the city was awash of dark water and neon headlights smeared across wet pavement. Ferry horns low and mournful on the bay. Wind rattled the windows of Hawthorne and Grant, and the rain drummed a steady, relentless rhythm that seemed to echo the unrest in Emma Caldwell's chest. She'd made it all the way home before she realized she'd left a set of annotated plans on her desk, the final markups for the client review. She could have redone them from memory. She almost did, but the thought of getting them wrong, of waking to a morning already behind, pushed her back into her coat. By 9:40 p.m., she was stepping into the silent lobby, shoes leaving a small constellation of raindrops on the stone floor. The 20-story ride felt longer than usual. The elevator hummed and sighed, climbing toward the place where so much of her recent life, her pride, her exhaustion, her tangled feelings seemed to live and breathe. When the doors opened, the creative floor was mostly dark. A single pool of lamplight glowed near the model room. Her desk sat in shadow, the stack of plans exactly where she'd left them. She reached for them, clutching the rolled set to her chest like something fragile and personal. Then she saw light seeping from Lucas Grant's office. She hesitated only a second before she moved toward it, the storm outside tossing sheets of rain against the glass, the wind thrumming like a warning. His office door stood ajar. He was there, coat tossed over a chair, tie loose, sleeves rolled, the lamplight carving clean edges along his jaw. He didn't look surprised to see her. If anything, he looked like he'd expected it. "You came back," he said, voice even, tired at the edges. "I forgot the markups," she replied, holding up the roll. "Couldn't sleep thinking about them." A faint, humorless smile touched his mouth. "I know the feeling." Silence settled deep and complicated, filled with everything they hadn't said since the argument. Thunder rolled over the bay, long and low. The lights flickered, then steadied. "I shouldn't have spoken to you the way I did," Emma said, before she could decide not to. The words were quiet, but they reached him. It wasn't fair. Lucas's gaze held hers for a long moment. "No," he said, "it wasn't, but I was worse." Wind pressed against the glass like a restless hand. Rain ticked in quick needles along the window seam. She stepped inside and closed the door. "So, what are we doing?" Lucas, his name sounded fragile in the room, like a glass set down too carefully. He exhaled, looked down at the drawings on his table, and then back at her. Trying not to make a mistake, he said, and failing. Emotion rose in her throat, hot and complicated. "You accuse me of being unprofessional because I laughed, because someone else was easy to be around." Her voice wavered. "But the truth is, being near you isn't easy for me. That's what I didn't want to admit." The words seemed to land somewhere in him that was both tender and dangerous. He took a small step closer, then another. "Emma," he said quietly, "if I keep pretending this is just about work, I will become a man I don't recognize." He swallowed. "And if I stop pretending, I risk becoming a man I promised I'd never be." The storm outside found a harder rhythm. The windows shivered. A ferry horn sounded far away, long, lonely, almost human. She set the plans on the table. Her hands were steady now. Her voice, not quite. "I don't want to be someone's secret," she said. "I don't want to be the reason you forget who you are." His face changed, softened, then broke open in something like grief. "You're not a reason, Emma," he said. "You're a reminder of what this work was supposed to be, of what I was supposed to be." Her breath hitched. "Then why does it hurt to be in the same room with you?" He didn't answer. He couldn't. They stood there with only the storm to keep time. He reached out, then stopped. She watched the movement, saw the restraint hit him like a wall. "I'm jealous," he said finally, the word quiet and raw. "I hate that I am. I hate that I let it make me smaller. You deserve better." Her eyes shone, but she didn't look away. "I deserved honesty," she said. "So did you." He took another step. The distance between them felt thinner than breath. "Honesty," he repeated, as if testing whether the thing could survive the air. He lifted a hand, then let it hover at her shoulder. "Not touching. If I tell you, I think about you when I'm trying to fall asleep, does that count?" She didn't move. "If I tell you I look for you in a room before I know I've done it, does that?" His mouth trembled. "Yes." The thunder came closer, shaking the glass, and still neither of them moved. He lowered his hand, finally, slowly, so it rested against the curve of her shoulder, warm through the fabric of her coat. She didn't flinch. She closed her eyes for half a heartbeat, then opened them again. "Emma," he whispered, just her name. But the way he said it took the air out of the room. She reached for him then, almost without deciding to, her fingers catching lightly at the front of his shirt, the cotton soft and warm beneath her hand. For a suspended second, everything balanced on the thin edge between restraint and surrender. It tipped. He bent his head. She raised her face. The first touch of his mouth was careful, then certain. Months of denial, weeks of friction, a day's worth of unspoken apologies, all of it poured into something that felt at once like falling and like finding ground. The kiss was not polite. It wasn't tidy. It was the kind that insists on truth. He drew her closer. She went without hesitation, hands sliding up to his shoulders. He tasted like coffee and rain, and something she didn't have a name for. The world outside blurred into sound and motion, the storm a drum, the windows a chorus. When they broke apart, both were breathless. The room seemed different, larger and smaller at once. The lamplight felt too bright. The rain felt too loud. Her heartbeat felt like something you could see. He stepped back first, just an inch, then one more. His hand fell from her shoulder as if it weighed more than it should. "We can't," he said, voice rough. "Not like this." "I know," she whispered, even as her body leaned toward him in betrayal of the mind that understood. Silence swelled. It wasn't empty. It was crowded with fear, relief, regret, desire, tenderness. He looked at her as if memorizing. She looked at him as if trying to forget already knowing she couldn't. She reached for the plans with fingers that shook now. He reached for nothing, as if anything he touched might break. "I should go," she said. "You should," he answered. He didn't move. She turned to the door, then paused. The storm pressed a white roar against the windows. The office smelled like wet wool and paper, and the metallic tang of rain that finds its way any place it can. Her voice was very soft. "Lucas." He closed his eyes, like a man bracing for impact. "Yes." She searched for something to hold the moment in place, and then let it go. "What have we just done?" she asked. Neither of them had an answer. She opened the door and stepped into the dim hallway. The elevator bell sounded distant, tired. Behind her, in the quiet room where they'd finally stopped pretending, Lucas stood very still, listening to the storm and to the echo of a door that felt heavier than wood. The lights flickered once, then steadied. Nothing else did. The storm passed, but the air inside Hawthorne and Grant didn't clear. It lingered thick, uncertain, charged with something unspoken that everyone seemed to feel, but no one could name. In the days that followed, Emma and Lucas existed in parallel lines, close enough to share the same air, but too far to meet each other's eyes. Conversations were brief, clipped to necessity. Emails replaced what used to be spoken, and when they did speak, their words felt like glass polished, precise, and dangerously breakable. By Wednesday, the whispers had started. Assistants in the hallway glanced up too quickly when Emma passed. Someone's laughter would cut short the moment she appeared. She could feel it, the quiet curiosity of people who didn't know the truth but wanted to. The firm had always thrived on efficiency and secrecy. Now it hummed with speculation. At her desk, Emma kept her head down. She worked harder than ever, long hours. No lunch breaks, endless revisions. If she stayed busy enough, maybe she wouldn't feel the ache of what she'd done. Maybe she could rewrite it in her mind as a mistake, a lapse, a momentary weakness that would fade with time. But memory doesn't fade on command. It lingers in the echo of a voice, in the scent of rain on wool, in the way silence feels different when it comes after something that mattered. At night, she lay awake staring at the ceiling of her small apartment, the storm replaying in her mind, the sound of his voice when he'd said her name, the weight of his hand on her shoulder, the taste of coffee and rain on his lips. She turned in bed, pressed her face into the pillow, and whispered, "Stop it." But her heart didn't listen. Across town, Lucas Grant sat alone in his penthouse overlooking the bay. The skyline of Seattle blurred by low clouds. His laptop glowed in the dark, blue light reflecting off the glass table scattered with sketches and contracts. He'd convinced himself that work would save him numbers, structures, logic, things that didn't bleed. But every time his phone vibrated, he looked up too fast. Every time the elevator chimed outside his office, he thought of her. He buried himself in deadlines, reviewing the same documents twice, 3 times, as if precision could erase memory. Yet between paragraphs and page margins, he saw her face, the flicker of hurt when he'd said they couldn't, the softness in her voice when she'd asked, "What have we just done?" He didn't have an answer then. He still didn't. For the first time in years, Lucas was afraid of himself, of the line he'd crossed, of how right and wrong could coexist so completely. He told himself to forget her, to let it fade. But forgetting felt like trying to erase color from a sunrise, impossible once you'd seen it. On Thursday afternoon, Clara appeared by Emma's desk holding 2 cups of chamomile tea. She didn't say anything at first, just set one down gently beside Emma's mouse pad. "You've been staring at that model for 20 minutes, Clara said softly. "It's not going to confess its secrets." Emma blinked, then leaned back. "I'm just tired." "You're haunted," Clara corrected. "There's a difference." Emma let out a shaky breath. "I made a mess of things. Clara, maybe, but even messes can teach us who we are." Emma rubbed her temples. "I shouldn't have let it happen. I knew better." Clara studied her quietly, her eyes kind but firm. We all break our own rules sometimes. The real question is, what do you do afterward? I stay quiet, Emma said bitterly. Pretend nothing happened. Clara reached across the desk, touching her hand lightly. Pretending doesn't heal anything, but neither does letting guilt run your life. Then, in that calm, measured voice of hers, she added, dignity first, Emma, always. Whatever you decide, make sure it comes from that place. Emma swallowed hard. I'm trying. I know, Clara said. That's why I'm not worried about you. When Clara walked away, Emma stared at the untouched tea. The warmth seeped slowly into her palms when she lifted it, a small comfort against the chill that had settled in her bones. The rest of the week passed in fragments. Emails, deadlines, quiet rooms heavy with unsaid words. Lucas and Emma still crossed paths occasionally, a shared elevator ride, a project briefing, a polite nod from across the table. Each encounter felt like standing near the edge of a cliff, knowing one wrong step could send them both over. The others noticed the distance, but no one dared to ask. Even Ethan, normally all charm and ease, seemed to sense something in the air he couldn't name. Friday night. The office emptied early. Rain began again, softer this time, whispering against the windows like an apology. Emma stayed behind, tidying her workspace, rearranging blueprints that didn't need rearranging. The silence pressed in until she couldn't bear it anymore. She shut down her computer and slung her bag over her shoulder. The walk to the elevator felt endless. Outside, the city glowed in reflections, wet pavement catching every light. She pulled her coat tighter and stepped into the drizzle, heading toward the bus stop. Her thoughts were heavy, looping. You did the right thing. You ended it before it began. But her heart didn't believe her. That's when her phone buzzed. She stopped under an awning, raindrops ticking off the edge above her. The message was from Ethan Miles. Hey, Emma, haven't seen you around much this week. Thought you might need a break. Coffee tomorrow, no blueprints, no deadlines, just conversation. My treat. She stared at the screen, unreadable for a long moment. Part of her wanted to say no, to hide, to stay small until the noise in her mind quieted, but another part, the one still aching for something simple and kind, whispered maybe. She didn't answer right away. She just stood there, rain brushing her hair, phone glowing softly in her hand. Somewhere in the city, Lucas sat alone in his apartment, the same rain streaking his windows, the same silence filling his room. He reached for his phone once, thought of her name, and then let it go. Two people, two hearts both pretending they'd chosen peace, when really, they'd just chosen distance. The rain kept falling, patient and endless. And tomorrow, a cup of coffee waited along with whatever truth would come next. Saturday morning brought a rare patch of sun to Seattle. The rain had retreated to the horizon, leaving behind slick streets and air that smelled faintly of wet cedar and coffee. Emma sat by the window of Harbor Brew Cafe, a cozy corner shop tucked near the waterfront. The hum of espresso machines mixed with low jazz on the speakers, and the world outside glowed in soft reflection. Ethan Miles arrived 5 minutes late, charming as ever, with a grin that could disarm tension and a voice that carried confidence without effort. He waved as he entered, shaking rain from his jacket even though the downpour had stopped hours ago. Sorry, traffic on the viaduct was a mess, he said, sliding into the seat across from her. You look like you've been here a while. Just enjoying the quiet, Emma replied, offering a polite smile. Quiet's overrated, Ethan said, signaling for coffee. I like a bit of noise. Keeps life interesting. They chatted easily at first about architecture, favorite old movies, the way Seattle could feel both infinite and small. Emma found herself relaxing in spite of the strange knot in her stomach that had been there all week. Ethan's warmth had that effect on people. It was hard not to lean into it. But gradually, the conversation shifted, subtle at first. So, Ethan said, stirring sugar into his coffee. How's the big civic project going? Lucas keeping everyone chained to their desks. Emma chuckled lightly. Something like that. I heard he's been pushing for that new composite design, stronger but cheaper to produce. You working on that? 2. Her smile faltered just slightly. That's not something I can really discuss. Of course, he said quickly, flashing an apologetic grin. Force of habit. I like to know how the competition thinks. The competition. He sipped his coffee. You know, rival firms, rival bids. It's a small world. I used to collaborate with a few folks over at Ellison and Pike before they lost that contract. They're still sore about it. Emma nodded slowly, her instincts sharpening. I didn't realize you were close with them. He shrugged. Old friends, I guess. The rest of the conversation felt thinner, the warmth dulled by a creeping unease. When they parted, he offered his usual easy smile. Let's do this again soon. Sure, she said, but her tone was distracted. She watched him go, a flicker of doubt tugging at the edge of her thoughts. Monday morning. The rain returned as if it had never left. Inside, Hawthorne and Grant. The tension that had once been personal was now professional. Lucas sat in his glass-walled office, a series of documents spread across his desk. The IT director stood across from him, face pale, voice low. We ran the audit you requested, the man said. Access logs from the shared drives show repeated downloads of confidential design files, civic center schematics, client data, contract bids. The user ID traces back to Ethan Miles. Lucas's hand tightened on the pen he was holding. How far does it go? 4 weeks at least. He's been forwarding drafts to an encrypted address linked to Ellison and Pike, the rival firm, the one that had been losing bids for months. Lucas exhaled slowly, anger and disappointment coiling beneath the surface. Does anyone else know? Not yet. But if this leaks externally, it won't, Lucas said sharply. Keep this between us until I decide next steps. The man nodded and slipped out of the office, leaving Lucas alone with the storm now brewing inside him. He leaned back in his chair, staring at the skyline through the rain-streaked window. His reflection looked tired, older somehow. Betrayal had a way of adding years. He thought of Emma, the long hours she'd spent refining those designs, the pride in her eyes when the models finally worked. She'd been kind to Ethan, trusted him, even defended his presence when others had questioned it, and now, if the audit was right, her name might be tied to his in every message he'd sent, every file he'd accessed. Lucas's throat tightened. Damn it, Ethan! He knew how rumors worked in firms like this. One careless narrative and reputations burned overnight. People wouldn't care about evidence, they'd care about the story. And Emma's story would be too easy to twist. He stood, pacing. He could already hear the whispers. The assistant who got too close. The architect who leaked for love or loyalty. No, he couldn't let that happen. Down the hall, Emma was reviewing her project schedule when Clara appeared, shutting the office door behind her. Word is, the partners are on edge, Clara said quietly. Something about data breaches. Emma frowned. Data breaches. Confidential plans getting out. They're keeping it quiet, but Lucas has been locked in his office all morning. He looked. She paused, searching for the word. Haunted. Emma tried to focus on her work, but unease crawled under her skin. Ethan's curious questions from the cafe replayed in her mind. The mention of Ellison and Pike, the timing. No, she thought, he couldn't, he wouldn't. Still, her stomach churned. That afternoon, Lucas found her in the model room, standing over the city mock-up. He hesitated at the doorway before stepping inside. Ms. Caldwell, he said, voice even but quieter than usual. She turned, surprised. Mr. Grant? He studied her face for a moment, as if memorizing every detail before speaking. How well do you know Ethan Miles? The question landed like a stone in her chest. We've worked together a few weeks. Why? Has he ever asked you about project data, client specifics? Her pulse quickened. Yes, once or twice. I thought he was just curious. Lucas nodded slowly, his jaw tightened, a flicker of something unreadable in his eyes. Anger, maybe, or fear. He's been leaking design files. To a competitor, Emma's breath caught. What, I have the logs? He's been sending our work to Ellison and Pike. She took a step back, hand to her mouth. Oh my God. Emma, Lucas said quietly, I need you to think carefully. Did you share anything with him? Even casually, her eyes filled with disbelief and hurt. No, never. You know I wouldn't. He did know, and yet, the risk was real, the optics worse. Lucas exhaled slowly. I believe you. Her gaze searched his face, but others won't. Will they? He didn't answer. That night, long after the office emptied, Lucas stayed. His desk was covered in evidence download logs, timestamps, email traces. The firm's partners would demand an explanation by morning. He knew what they'd find if they dug deep enough. Ethan's trail leading straight through Emma's collaboration folders. The system didn't care about context. It only cared about connection. And he couldn't let her take the fall for something she hadn't done. He opened a blank report, typed a few lines, then stopped. What he was about to do could cost him. He was preparing to reassign the access under his own credentials, shielding her from scrutiny. It wasn't logical. It wasn't even ethical. But it was right, because somewhere between rivalry and regret, Lucas Grant had found something worth protecting even at the risk of himself. He saved the file, shut down the computer, and stared at the city lights bleeding into the fog. Somewhere out there, Ethan was playing a dangerous game, and Emma, unknowingly, had just become the collateral. Lucas pressed a hand to the glass, the city's reflection dimming around him. Not this time, he whispered. Then he turned off the lights, carrying the weight of a choice that would change everything. Monday mornings were never kind at Hawthorne and Grant, but this one felt heavier than most. The usual rhythm, the quiet chatter, the clicking keyboards, the scent of fresh brewed coffee was gone. In its place hung a charged silence, thick with tension and curiosity. Word had spread before the partners could even make an announcement. Someone had breached company files, confidential designs, bids, client records. By the time the internal email arrived, mandatory meeting, 10 a.m., conference room. The office was already buzzing like a hive disturbed. Emma sat at her desk, her fingers locked together so tightly they ached. Every click of a shoe heel in the hallway sounded like a verdict. Clara hovered near the window, pretending to check messages, but her eyes flicked toward Emma every few seconds. You know what this is about, don't you? She whispered. Emma nodded faintly. I think so. Lucas will handle it, Clara said. Whatever's coming, you're not alone. But Emma wasn't sure she believed that. Not after everything, the silence, the distance, the storm that had left both of them raw. At 9:58, the conference room filled. Executives lined one side of the table. Associates and assistants gathered along the walls, whispering until a voice cut through the noise. Let's begin. Mr. Grant. Lucas stood at the head of the room, calm and immaculate, a dark suit against the pale morning light pouring through the glass. To most, he looked as he always did, controlled, unshakable. Only Emma, standing near the far corner, saw the tension behind the stillness, the small tick in his jaw, the restrained fire in his eyes. Mr. Hanley, one of the senior partners, spoke first. We've confirmed that sensitive project data was leaked to a rival firm. This breach compromises months of work and could expose client contracts. Our IT department has traced irregular access patterns to one of our consultants, Ethan Miles. A murmur rippled through the room. Hanley continued. Mr. Miles has been placed on leave pending further investigation. However, he glanced down at his papers, then up again, eyes sharp. Some of the data originated from files accessed through Ms. Caldwell's workstation. Every sound in the room seemed to vanish at once. Emma's heart lurched. She heard her name echo in the silence like a gavel. 100 eyes turned toward her, some sympathetic, others curious, a few already convinced. Hanley folded his hands. Ms. Caldwell, Would you care to explain how your login credentials appeared in these transmissions? Her throat tightened. I don't know. Ethan had access for collaboration. He must have. That's a serious claim. Hanley interrupted. Do you have evidence? Emma opened her mouth, but no words came. She could feel heat rising up her neck, the familiar sting of humiliation. It didn't matter that she was innocent. Perception would devour proof if she couldn't defend herself fast enough. Lucas's voice cut through the tension, low but resonant. That's enough. Hanley frowned. Mr. Grant, I said that's enough. Lucas straightened, his gaze sweeping the room with quiet authority. If you question Ms. Caldwell's integrity, you question mine. The air stilled. Excuse me, Hanley said, bristling. You heard me, Lucas replied evenly. Ms. Caldwell works under my supervision. Every file she accessed was at my direction. Every model, every draft, every data point passed through channels I approved. If there's fault here, it's mine. A hum of disbelief moved across the room. Emma's eyes widened. Lucas, he didn't look at her. Furthermore, he continued, I've conducted my own review. Our IT logs show Ethan Miles used remote access keys after hours. He cloned Ms. Caldwell's credentials to conceal his tracks. He's been forwarding our proprietary data to Ellison and Pike for weeks. Hanley blinked. You have proof of this. Lucas reached for a file on the table and slid it forward. All of it. Email timestamps, metadata, transfer routes. I confirmed it last night. The senior partners exchanged glances, muttering under their breath. Finally, Hanley cleared his throat. We'll need to verify. Of course you'll find it. Holds, Lucas said. But in the meantime, I won't have this firm treating one of its best employees like collateral damage. Emma stood frozen, her chest tight, her hands trembling slightly at her sides. The man who'd once accused her now stood between her and ruin publicly, decisively, without hesitation. When Hanley finally spoke again, his tone had softened. If your findings are correct, Mr. Grant, Ms. Caldwell will be cleared entirely. Lucas nodded once. They're correct. The meeting adjourned in uneasy silence. Chairs scraped. Voices returned in quiet waves. Emma didn't move until Clara's hand touched her shoulder. See, Clara whispered. Told you. He wouldn't let you fall. But Emma couldn't answer. She could barely breathe. Outside the glass room, employees pretended not to stare as she passed. The whispering had changed tone, no longer suspicion, but confusion, maybe even respect. Still, she felt hollow, the adrenaline burning through her veins with nowhere to go. Lucas caught up with her by the elevator. Emma, he said quietly. She turned, searching his face. You didn't have to do that. Yes, he said. I did. For a moment, neither spoke. The noise of the office faded behind them, replaced by the hum of the elevator motor and the soft rhythm of rain against the windows. I thought you'd stop believing in me, she said finally. I never stopped, he replied. I just forgot how to show it. Her eyes glistened, but she smiled faintly. Thank you. He exhaled a quiet, almost weary sound. You don't need to thank me. You earned this respect long before I defended it. The elevator doors opened, but neither moved. Something fragile passed between them. Not romance this time, but something steadier, deeper. A mutual recognition of strength and pain and the thin line between the two. She nodded once, then stepped inside. The doors closed, reflecting his face for a brief second before swallowing her from view. Later that afternoon, Lucas stood by his office window as the city blurred into mist. The crisis had passed, but the cost lingered. He'd protected her career, yes, but the walls around his own heart had cracked wider in the process. He turned from the window and glanced at the desk where her sketches still lay, a forgotten set of concept notes. Edges worn from use. For the first time in weeks, the sight didn't bring turmoil. It brought clarity. He smiled faintly, just once, and whispered to no one. She never needed saving. She just needed someone to believe in her. Rain again? Of course. Seattle had a way of marking every turning point in Emma's life with water. Soft, persistent, impossible to ignore. The city outside Hawthorne and Grant was blurred beneath a silver curtain, drops sliding down the glass like time itself melting. Inside, the office was mostly empty. It was late, too late for work, but neither she nor Lucas had gone home after the meeting that morning. She had stayed to finish reports. He had stayed to avoid thinking. Both knew the other was still there. Both had avoided eye contact all day. Until now. "Ms. Caldwell," came his voice, low and deliberate from the doorway. "Do you have a minute?" She looked up from her desk. His tone was calm, polite too. Polite, like armor. "Still?" She nodded. "Of course." He gestured toward his office, the one that had witnessed more tension between them than any room deserved. When she stepped inside, he closed the door quietly behind them. The sound of rain filled the space between words. For a long moment, neither spoke. Lucas stood near the window, hands in his pockets. The city's reflection fractured across the glass. Emma remained by the desk, her heartbeat steady, but loud in her ears. "First," he said finally, "I owe you an apology. For everything, the accusation, the silence, the way I handled things." She watched him, surprised by the softness in his voice. "You already made it right." "Lucas?" He shook his head. "No. I defended your name? Yes. But I didn't defend your heart, not when it mattered." Her breath caught. "You don't owe me that." "I do," he said quietly. "Because somewhere along the line, I let my fear dictate who I was around you." He turned then, his face no longer the unreadable mask she had known. His eyes were tired but open, unguarded for once. "I built this career on control," he said. "Precision, discipline, distance. It's how I survive. But when you walked into this firm, you ruined all of that. You challenged me. You made me question things I hadn't questioned in years about fairness, about worth, about what I wanted out of this life." His voice faltered, and I hated it, because I couldn't control it. Emma stood still, every word sinking deep, like rain finding cracks in dry ground. He stepped closer. "I've tried to bury it, to call it professionalism, to hide behind rules and ethics, but none of it changes the truth." He paused, meeting her gaze. "I love you, Emma. Not the idea of you. You, the woman who walked into my world and refused to shrink when I tried to intimidate her. The one who challenged me until I became someone better." Her lips parted, but no sound came. The rain intensified, drumming against the window like applause from the heavens, or maybe a warning. He exhaled shakily. "I'm terrified of this, of what it means, of what I could lose. I've spent my life keeping emotion out of the equation. And now," he gestured helplessly between them, "now I can't stop caring." Silence stretched. Then Emma spoke softly, her voice threaded with emotion. "You think fear makes you weak," she said, "but it doesn't. It just makes you human." He looked at her as if he wasn't sure he deserved the kindness in her tone. She moved closer, slow, careful. "Do you know what I admire most about you, Lucas?" He shook his head slightly. "You demand excellence," she said, "not just from others, from yourself. And that's exhausting. I know, but beneath all that control, there's someone who actually feels everything more deeply than anyone else in the room. You just hide it behind rules and deadlines." Her voice softened. "You're not the only one who hides, you know." His brow furrowed. "What do you mean I built walls too?" she admitted. "Not to keep people out, but to convince myself I didn't need anyone to stay. After my divorce, I swore I'd never depend on another man again. I thought strength meant isolation, that self-respect meant silence. But you," she smiled faintly, eyes shimmering, "you made me realize that dignity and connection don't have to cancel each other out." Lucas stepped closer, close enough that she could see the reflection of city lights in his eyes. "Emma," She took a breath. Maybe we both built walls not to protect ourselves, but to hide. From pain, from love, from the truth that needing someone doesn't make us weak. The air between them tightened, warm and fragile. He whispered, "And what do we do now?" Her heart ached with the simplicity of it. "Maybe," she said, "we stop hiding." Lucas reached up, brushing a strand of hair from her face with the back of his hand. The touch was gentle, reverent. "No more walls," he said quietly. "No more fear." She replied, "They didn't kiss. Not this time. The moment didn't need it. It was enough to stand there close, breathing the same air, both of them stripped of pretense. Outside, thunder rolled faintly over the water, but the sound no longer frightened either of them. After a while, Lucas turned back to the window. "We'll have to be careful," he said. "The firm will be watching." "There are rules," Emma smiled. "You and your rules." He smiled back, weary but lighter somehow. "Their habit. Then maybe," she said gently, "we start a new one." He looked at her, really looked and nodded. "Honesty. Always," she said. The rain eased, turning into a soft drizzle. The lamplight caught in the droplets, scattering gold across the glass. For the first time since they'd met, the silence between them wasn't tense or loaded. It was peaceful. Emma walked to the door, pausing before leaving. "Lucas, yes," she smiled faintly. "You don't have to love me perfectly, just truthfully." He nodded once, eyes soft. "That's the only way I know how." And as the door closed behind her, Lucas exhaled, long and unsteady. The rain outside finally stopped, for once. The city was still, and so was he. By Tuesday morning, the rain had stopped for real this time. The sky over Seattle stretched pale and clean, streaked with faint sunlight that caught the edges of glass towers like forgiveness. The city moved on as if nothing had happened but inside Hawthorne and Grant. Change was quietly unfolding. Emma sat at her desk, still half in the afterglow and half in the aftermath of what she and Lucas had shared. "No more walls," he'd said. The words had echoed through her all night, comforting and terrifying in equal measure. But the world didn't pause for love. It demanded choices. By mid-morning, she was called to the executive floor. Clara gave her a thumbs up as she passed, but the gesture only deepened the knot in Emma's stomach. She had an idea what this was about. Lucas was already waiting in the conference room, flanked by Mr. Hanley from the Partners Board and Margaret Lynn, the firm's HR director. The setting was formal, but the energy wasn't adversarial, more like the quiet before an important decision. "Ms. Caldwell," Hanley began, motioning for her to sit. "You've been with this firm nearly a year, correct?" "Yes, sir," she said evenly. "In that time, your performance has been exemplary. Your designs, your project leadership exceptional. Thank you." Hanley leaned back slightly. "However, we now face a matter of ethics and optics. As you're aware, the board must address any potential conflict of interest arising from personal relationships within leadership." Emma's pulse skipped. She kept her expression composed. "I understand." Margaret Lynn spoke next, her voice calm, precise. "We've reviewed the circumstances. Mr. Grant has volunteered to remove himself from any direct supervisory role over you, effective immediately." Emma's head turned toward Lucas. His eyes met hers steady, resolute. "It's the right thing to do," he said simply. Hanley nodded. "Additionally, given your proven ability and contributions, the board has voted to promote you to partnership associate on the civic design project. You'll be leading the team moving forward." Emma blinked. What Lucas allowed a small smile. "It's long overdue, but..." She hesitated, searching for the words. "Is this a promotion or a transfer out of sight?" Hanley exchanged a look with Margaret. "It's both fair and necessary. Ms. Caldwell, you've earned the position. But yes, it also creates a healthy boundary. Transparency protects everyone." Emma sat back, absorbing the weight of it. This was everything she'd worked for: respect, recognition, leadership. Yet it arrived wrapped in caution tape. Lucas spoke softly, his voice carrying that same mix of authority and humility that had always undone her. "Emma, this isn't exile. It's opportunity. You'll have full autonomy. Your own team. Your own name on the door." She stared at the polished table for a long moment. "Is this your idea?" she asked. "Yes," he said. "All of it." Her throat tightened. "You're giving up your position." "I'm stepping aside," he corrected. "The board will redistribute oversight. I'll stay on as director of the larger firm, but not over you," Hanley interjected gently. "You'll both maintain your positions with the firm, but we're setting a precedent, one built on ethics, not rumor." Emma nodded slowly, torn between gratitude and unease. When the meeting ended, she walked with Lucas down the hall. The corridor was lined with framed blueprints, each one a piece of the firm's history. It felt symbolic, each drawing a past decision, each corridor a path not yet taken. They stopped near the end, by the window overlooking the city. "You didn't have to do this," she said quietly. "Yes, I did," he replied. "It's the only way forward." "You mean for the firm?" she said. "I mean for us," he said, voice low. She met his eyes. "Do you really think this will make things easier?" "No," he said after a moment, "but it will make them honest." Emma looked out at the skyline, the cranes, the water, the infinite gray. For years, she'd chased success as if it were proof of worth. Now she was being asked to accept it as a condition of love. Her thoughts swirled. Can dignity and desire coexist? Can two strong wills share one world without breaking each other? Finally, she turned back to him. "I don't want this promotion if it feels like compensation. I want it because I've earned it." Lucas's eyes softened. "You have. Completely." "Then there's something else?" she said. "If I take it on my terms." He tilted his head slightly. "Which are equality," she said simply. "No secret favors, no hidden apologies. I lead this project because I'm capable, not because I'm the woman you—" She stopped herself. He finished the sentence quietly. "Love." She nodded. "Yes." Lucas's jaw tensed slightly, but then he smiled. Then it settled. "Partners. Partners." She echoed. For a moment, they just stood there, side by side, the city stretching out before them like a blank page. Later that afternoon, Emma sat alone in the model room, staring at the miniature skyline she and Lucas had built months ago. The bridge model, his father's design, stood near the center. The one he'd told her had collapsed decades ago, taking lives and leaving scars he'd never fully confessed. She traced a finger along its tiny span, the symbol of both failure and redemption. "We all build something that breaks," she thought. "The courage is in rebuilding it honestly." Outside, a soft breeze moved through the open window. The smell of wet cedar drifted in, grounding her. She smiled faintly to herself and began jotting notes for her new team ideas for sustainable design. Community spaces, light and air, things that connected, not divided. Her email pinged with a short message. From L. Grant subject. "For what it's worth, you were never under me. Emma, you were always beside me. Congratulations. Partner." L. She stared at the words for a long moment, the kind of silence that hums with meaning. Then she hit reply. From E. Caldwell subject. Re. "For what it's worth, I'll hold you to that. Equality means I get the bigger office window." When she hit send, she laughed quietly to herself. The sound surprised her. It was light, unburdened, the sound of someone finally standing on her own ground. That evening, as the office emptied, Lucas passed by her door. He paused, seeing her bent over a new sketch, hair tucked behind her ear, concentration written across her face. He didn't interrupt. He just watched for a moment, the corners of his mouth lifting in quiet pride. Then, softly, he whispered to himself, "She's leading now." Outside, The fading sun brushed gold across the skyline, the same color as beginnings. And for the first time, both of them were ready to meet it without fear. 3 months later, Seattle was in bloom. Cherry blossoms lined the sidewalks downtown, softening the edges of the steel and glass skyline. The air smelled faintly of salt and new beginnings, a scent Emma Caldwell had come to love. Inside Hawthorne and Grant, change was visible in quieter ways. The tension that had once gripped the office was gone, replaced by something calmer, steadier. Conversations flowed again. Laughter found its way back into the hallways. And at the center of it all, Emma and Lucas had found their rhythm professional, equal, and, when the doors closed, something deeply human. The months unfolded like an architectural time lapse. Blueprints became sketches. Sketches became models. Models turned into steel and light. Emma stood at the helm of the Civic Design Project, her leadership firm yet generous. She no longer sought to prove her worth. She simply lived it. Her team respected her, not just for her brilliance, but for the way she listened, for how she made even the youngest interns feel heard. Lucas, now overseeing firm-wide operations, remained a guiding presence but never a shadow. He reviewed proposals, gave feedback, and sometimes challenged her ideas, but always as an equal. Their debates, once sharp and defensive, had evolved into something like music balanced, curious, alive. Clara would sometimes glance between them during meetings, smiling knowingly. "I swear," she told a colleague one afternoon, "you can feel the oxygen in the room when those two talk." At lunch breaks, the office would find them side by side, poring over sketches, sharing quiet jokes only they seemed to understand. There was no secrecy anymore, no need for whispered excuses or second glances. Transparency had replaced tension, and respect had replaced rumor. One evening, long after most of the staff had gone home, Emma stood in the model room again. The skyline she'd built with her team was almost complete, a miniature of what would soon reshape the heart of the city. Lucas appeared in the doorway, jacket over one arm, still at it. "Almost done," she said, smiling without looking up. "You said something about the lighting grid being off by 2 degrees. You were right." He walked closer, stopping beside her. "I usually am." She gave him a playful glare. "Don't ruin your progress by reminding me." He chuckled, setting his jacket down. "Need a hand?" "Sure, but only if you follow my lead." "I'm learning," he said, slowly. They adjusted the small glass panels together, hands brushing now and then, the air between them comfortable. Outside, rain had started again, gentle this time, more like background music than storm. For a long moment, they stood quietly, looking at the model glowing under soft light. "You know," Lucas said, "I used to think architecture was about control, perfect angles, precise measurements, predictable outcomes. But it's really about trust, isn't it? Every structure is a gamble. Materials, people, time. You build, and then you believe it'll hold." Emma looked up at him. "It's the same with people." He nodded slowly. "It is outside of work." Lucas had begun doing something he hadn't done in years, talking. Not to clients or partners, but to a therapist. He never told Emma much about the sessions, but she noticed the difference. The way he breathed more evenly when things went wrong. The way he stopped gripping his pen so tightly during meetings. Once, she found a small notebook on his desk, filled with quick, messy notes. The top page read, "Perfection is protection." But protection can become a prison. When she asked about it, he smiled faintly. "Homework." Then, after a pause, "It helps." She didn't press. She just touched his hand briefly before turning back to her work. Sometimes, healing didn't need words. It just needed space. On Friday evenings, they often met after work at Emma's apartment, a small, sunlit space with mismatched mugs and a window overlooking the sound. The world outside stayed loud and ambitious, but inside, life was simple. They cooked together, Lucas chopping vegetables with surgeon-like precision, Emma teasing him for measuring pepper flakes like equations. "Old habits," he said once, shrugging. "Let go of a few," she replied, nudging him with her elbow. "The pasta won't collapse." Later, they'd sit on the couch, barefoot, wine glasses in hand, the smell of basil and garlic still lingering in the air. The TV played something neither of them paid much attention to. Sometimes they talked about work, sometimes about life before it. Once, he told her about his father again, how he'd never really forgiven himself for the bridge collapse, how Lucas had built his whole career on ensuring that kind of failure would never happen again. "I thought if I kept everything perfect," he said quietly, "I'd never lose anyone." Emma leaned against him. "You didn't lose me." He smiled softly. "I know." The following Monday, Emma walked into the new civic site, a vast open lot where the foundation for their design was finally being poured. Hard hats, steel beams, the smell of wet concrete. It was everything she loved about the work. As she watched the cranes move with slow grace, her voice echoed in her mind like a quiet journal. Entry trust isn't built by promises or apologies. It's built by daily choices, by showing up, by doing the hard thing, even when it's inconvenient, by believing in someone long enough for them to believe in themselves again. She smiled to herself, the wind tugging at her hair, around her, the hum of machinery mixed with laughter from her team. Life was moving forward. From the corner of her eye, she saw Lucas approaching in a white hard hat, his shirt sleeves rolled up, clipboard in hand. He looked every bit the leader, but this time, she didn't see the man who once intimidated her. She saw her partner. He stopped beside her, eyes following the slow rise of the steel frame. "Looks like it's holding." "It will," she said confidently. He turned toward her, a faint smile curving his lips. "You sound certain." "I am," she said. "We built it on trust." That night, back in her apartment, Emma wrote in her sketchbook something she hadn't done for herself in a long time. Her pencil moved slowly, words flowing like thought instead of design. Maybe love isn't about the grand gestures or the perfect lines. Maybe it's about the quiet rebuilding, the steady hands, the honest words, the courage to keep showing up even after everything breaks. She looked at the page, smiled, and set the pencil down. Outside, the rain began again, tapping softly against the window. But this time, it didn't sound like melancholy. It sounded like rhythm, like life continuing, steady and sure. 1 year later, Seattle woke to a clear morning, one of those rare Pacific Northwest days when the sky stretched endless and blue, the air carrying just a hint of salt from the sound. The world shimmered with the promise of something new. Inside, a downtown auditorium, the National Architectural Design Awards ceremony was underway. Rows of polished chairs, soft murmurs, the faint click of cameras all wrapped in the hum of anticipation. Emma Caldwell sat near the front, her heart a quiet drum beneath her silk blouse. The stage lights glowed against the backdrop of blueprints and glass renderings. Around her, voices blended in a blur of introductions and applause. She had attended this ceremony twice before, once as an intern, once as part of someone else's team. But this time was different. This time, her name was on the project. This time, the design was hers. Her team's Horizon Bridge project, the one that had consumed a year of her life, was now among the finalists for the National Award in Civic Innovation. The bridge wasn't just a structure, it was a connection between two communities long divided by geography and economics. Steel and light. Yes, but also story and soul. When they announced her name, she almost didn't hear it at first. It was Clara's delighted squeal beside her that broke the trance. "Emma, that's you!" The applause rose like a wave, and Emma stood, stunned, humbled, and trembling. She walked to the stage under the spotlight's warmth, the world around her blurring into color and sound. The presenter smiled as he handed her the glass award. For visionary design that redefines unity not just in architecture, but in spirit. Emma took the microphone, her fingers cold despite the heat of the moment. She looked out over the sea of faces and took a breath. I used to believe architecture was about perfection. She began softly, about lines and symmetry, about making something beautiful enough to last. She paused, her voice steady, but full of quiet emotion. But this year taught me something different. That building, something that lasts, isn't about control, it's about trust, about letting others hold part of the design, about believing that what you build together can withstand time, change, and even heartbreak. Her words lingered in the stillness. Applause followed slow at first, then rising into a swell that made her blink back tears. From the stage, she saw him, Lucas Grant, standing at the back of the hall. No spotlight, no announcement, just him tall, composed, watching with that familiar calm that had once unnerved her and now grounded her. Their eyes met across the crowd. He smiled, not the polished professional smile she'd once feared, but something softer, almost shy. And for a moment, the noise faded. It was as if the whole world had stepped aside for them to breathe. The air outside was crisp, carrying the faint scent of rain that hadn't yet fallen. Emma stood near the stone steps of the auditorium, award in hand, the metal warm from her touch. She didn't hear his footsteps, but she felt his presence before he spoke. "Congratulations." "Partner," Lucas said quietly behind her. She turned, smiling. "You came? I wouldn't have missed it for anything. I thought you were in D.C. for the Urban Renewal Conference." "I was," he said, stepping closer, hands in his coat pockets. "But I decided some things matter more than panel discussions." Emma shook her head, laughing softly. "You never did like missing a deadline." He smiled. "Not when it involves you." For a moment, they simply stood there, the wind tugging at her hair, the city's hum behind them. The late afternoon light painted his features in gold. She tilted her head, studying him. "You've changed." "Lucas?" He nodded slightly. "I had a good teacher." She smiled. "You mean a stubborn one?" "That too," he said, his tone affectionate. Then he reached into his pocket. Not a velvet box, not a flourish, just a small folded piece of paper, creased at the edges. He handed it to her. "I drew something for you." She unfolded it carefully. It was a blueprint hand-drawn, imperfect, lines slightly uneven, but she recognized the design immediately. It wasn't a building, it was a small house, 2 stories, a porch, a wide window overlooking what looked like a garden. "At first, I thought I'd make it symbolic," he said quietly, "but then I realized some dreams aren't metaphors. They're real. They're simple. This one's ours. If you want it—" Her fingers trembled slightly as she traced the lines. "You're proposing with a floor plan?" He chuckled softly. "I figured words could fail me. Blueprints never do." She looked up at him, eyes glistening. "Lucas?" He stepped closer, his voice low. "It's not grand. No fireworks, no champagne, just a promise. To keep building, to keep choosing, every day." Her throat tightened. "You really think you can handle me every day?" He smiled. "I think I already do." She laughed then, soft, genuine, the kind of laughter that made people turn and smile without knowing why. "Yes," she said, "I want it, all of it." He exhaled, relief and joy mingling in his eyes. "You sure absolutely." She held up the blueprint, folding it carefully. "I like your kind of forever." He reached out, brushing a raindrop or maybe a tear from her cheek. "You've always been the foundation. Emma, I just finally learned how to build around you." They stood there as the first light rain began to fall, gentle and steady. The city glimmered under it like glass, reflecting everything they'd survived. He slipped an arm around her waist. "You know, we used to tease each other." She smiled, leaning against him, until jealousy and a kiss changed everything. He kissed her forehead softly. until love rebuilt everything. 1 year later, they were no longer rivals, no longer hiding behind perfection. They were builders of bridges, of trust, of love. They learned that forever isn't found in promises. It's built brick by brick, choice by choice, day by day. And sometimes it begins with a storm, but ends with sunlight. They used to tease each other until love rebuilt everything. In the end, Emma and Lucas's story isn't just about romance. It's about the quiet courage it takes to be honest with ourselves. We spend so much of life trying to appear strong, hiding our fears behind perfection, our hearts behind routine. But true strength isn't the absence of vulnerability. It's the willingness to face it with grace. Their journey reminds us that trust is not built overnight. It grows through daily choices, showing up, listening, forgiving, and trying again when things break, whether in love, friendship, or work. Dignity means standing firm in who we are while still being open enough to change. Sometimes the people who challenge us most are the ones who help us grow the deepest. And sometimes, what looks like a storm is simply life's way of washing away what no longer serves us. So, build your days like Emma built her bridges, with patience, truth, and faith that even after collapse, something beautiful can rise again. Because the real architecture of life is not made of steel or stone, but of trust, compassion, and courage to rebuild one choice at a time. Thank you, dear listeners, for staying with us through this story of love, trust, and second chances. If Emma and Lucas's journey touched something in your heart, if it reminded you that it's never too late to rebuild, then let that feeling travel further. Please take a moment to like, share, and subscribe to Shining Stories, where every tale is a gentle reminder that hope, dignity, and kindness still matter. Until next time, stay kind, stay curious, and remember, every heart has its own blueprint of forever.